I'd like to take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you for joining our show. We're on multiple stations on 1310 AM and FM, and also on a number of internet stations. Also, you can catch us on YouTube and Zoom and other media. This week, we're going to focus on some local issues that have been keeping me up at night. I left my TV on. I woke up in the middle of the night and I saw back-to-back commercial by a person running for mayor. And it bothered me because they're making these allegations somehow we're some crime-infested system and city, and they blame folks. And so I want to get the record straight on that. Yeah, we do have an uptick in crime, but today I have our superstar prosecutor who's been fighting this battle, trying to protect life and administer fair and equal justice under law, and been a prosecutor for 17 years, and probably been the best prosecutor we've ever had here in Marion County. And he's out there every day trying to make sure justice is both the criminal and the people who are victims, and also people who are innocent. He tried to look into projects to make sure that their rights are protected, and they're guilty. Of course, they should be subject to punishment under law. So today we have Ryan Mears. Mr. Mears, how are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. It's always great to be on your program, and thank you for that very kind introduction.
Yeah, let's get right to the point here. Now, locally and nationally, there's been a push by politicians to somehow paint urban areas as infected with crime, and now all of a sudden they got solutions. In our city, what is the principal reason why we have uptick in shooting and things like that? What occurs in terms of our legislators, and what change has happened lately?
Well, I think the biggest problem that we have in Indiana is our Indiana legislature thought the solution to these problems was to give everybody a gun. And when you don't criminalize the possession of firearms, that means anybody can carry a gun in public. And what we see too often in our community is very simple confrontation, very simple disputes result in gun violence because everybody's armed. And it automatically ratchets up the tension in every single confrontation when both parties are armed. And as a consequence, we are seeing needless and senseless gun violence consistently in our community because everybody's walking around with a gun.
Well, it's shameful. Well, this year, we had a convention with the NRA, the National Rifle Association, and a person running for mayor, I think Shreve, is a member of that group. How much influence do this type outside powerful group have in terms of influencing legislation that says that it's okay for everybody to have weapons, even weapons of mass destruction now?
Right. I mean, they wrote the legislation. I mean, there's no regulation of firearms effectively in the state of Indiana. You know, if you want to walk around the circle right now with an AK-47, there's nothing stopping you. If you want to sell an AK-47 to another person, there's no place you have to register that sale. There's no regulation in terms of how that sale needs to occur. If you just want to walk around with a handgun in a restaurant, there's nothing anybody can do to stop you. And so what we've done is effectively said that it's okay for everybody to carry any type of firearm, no matter where they go. There are limited exceptions like schools and government buildings. But other than that, if you want to walk around the city and you want to have an AK-47 or an AR-15, whatever semi-automatic assault rifle is your weapon of choice, the Indiana legislature thinks that's a good idea.
Okay, so these commercials that I think are just dumb, it just drives me crazy that somehow I see these commercials where they paint this picture that a person who has no experience in law enforcement can come into the city, can come into our city, and all of a sudden solve crime. I mean, how in the hell do you do that? I was just curious. I mean, he's said, I got this plan. I'm gonna hire a public safety director and crime's gonna go away. Is that, I mean, it's gotta be the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Am I off base with that?
Well, I mean, the scope of our problem is bigger than any one person. And the reality is that the prosecutor's office, law enforcement, and other people who try to make, positive efforts as it results to dealing with crime in our city are really, we have one arm tied behind our back with our gun laws. And I hope people realize that when guns are taken off the street, not only is that a benefit to the community, but when we take those guns off the street, we test it against every single unsolved shooting and every single unsolved homicide. And as a consequence, we were solving more cases when we were taking those guns off the street. IMPD, the number of guns that they've taken off the street has been dramatically reduced with the passage of permitless carry. And so as a consequence, IMPD is solving fewer non-fatal shootings. They're solving fewer homicide cases, and we have more guns on our street because of this legislation.
Well, the problem is that we need to put blame where it bleeds. This is a Republican-controlled state legislature with a supermajority. They pushed through these draconian gun laws, and now we got a guy run for mayor named Jefferson Street, I think is his name, who says he's going to solve the problem that they created. Now, I think that most people don't realize that when you take a gun off the street, also, do you able sometime to extrapolate like DNA evidence off these guns? And sometimes you can match up some of the bullets from their shell casing from these guns that is confiscated.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's one of the best. It's so ironic because the Indiana legislature said, Marion County, you're doing a good job of solving violent crime by when you confiscate guns, by test firing the bullets against the guns you take off the street, by doing the DNA analysis that you just alluded to. The Indiana legislature actually gave the city of Indianapolis and Marion County money because they said, wow, that really works. You guys are doing a good job taking those guns off the street and making, turning that into a positive of solving crime and solving some of these unsolved homicide cases and solving some of these non-fatal shootings. And then literally without irony in the next breath, they said, but we're going to take away the requirement that you have a permit. And the result of that is we're taking far fewer guns off the street. And unfortunately, IMPD is solving way fewer crimes.
What can citizens do in our community to help out with this problem? Because it's not a problem that any one person or entity. What do you encourage our residents to do so that we could sort of slow down the tide? Because now, you have teenagers with guns, you have crazy people with guns, you have all kind of demographics and things like that. Now, none of these guns are actually manufactured in our communities. They're brought into our community. But what can our citizens do to help tide this? I know we have some issue in terms of conflict resolution, but what can the citizens do to help out in this process?
Well, I think the first thing is people need to understand that if you are going to have a firearm, that's a responsibility. And you have a duty to care for that firearm, to store it properly, to clean it properly. And if you keep a firearm in your car, you need to make sure that it's safely secured so people don't steal it. One of the things that we're seeing is because everybody's walking around with a gun, we are seeing more and more guns being stolen out of vehicles, more and more guns being stolen out of homes. And a lot of people always ask me, well, how do so many young people end up with guns? It's because they're stealing them out of cars. It's because they're stealing them out of homes. And it's because they know pretty much everybody has a gun. And the consequence of that is a lot of people don't store them properly. And so it's these guns are getting into the wrong hands of people. The other part why it's so important to store these firearms responsibly and properly is because we are seeing far too many young people getting access to those firearms and hurting themselves or someone else. We have had to file way too many charges against parents, against guardians, against people who are caring for kids because they did not safely store their firearm and it got into the hands of a child and that child used that gun and either hurt themselves or somebody else. And, it's just one of those situations that is entirely preventable. So we need people to be responsible gun owners. That's the first thing the community can do. But the second thing is the community needs to send a clear message to the Indiana legislature that this is just bad public policy. Nobody thinks it's a good idea for people to be able to walk around Monument Circle with an AK-47. Nobody thinks that you should be able to walk into any store with a gun on your hip and have that gun be fully loaded. And so we need to continue to make sure that we don't forget about the advocacy part of this to let people know that this is just bad public policy. And when you're in a densely populated urban area, when you give everybody a gun, that's a recipe for disaster.
Well, there's something you just mentioned I think is important. We, in my law firm, we sue people for host liability or for gun ownership liability. Like, in other words, we've successfully been able to obtain resolution against parents when their children cause harm to other folks. And because they have to safely maintain their weapons in such a manner in which they don't let the kids have access to it to cause harm to a third person. What about criminal liability? What type of repercussion can a parent get if they don't properly store their weapon and allow these kids to go in and cause injury or harm to others?
Yeah, unfortunately, in the last couple of weeks, we filed more than one of those cases. I think we filed 3 of them where people were charged with 11 level 1 felonies, which is a range of punishment of 20 to 40 years because people did not safely store their firearms. And so that's something, unfortunately, that we're seeing way too often. And people who are ordinarily or otherwise, law-abiding citizens find themselves in the criminal justice system charged with the highest level felony that we have, a level 1 felony, where they're looking at 20 to 40 years, on top of the fact that they're oftentimes grieving the loss of either their own child or a child that they were caring for and probably have a pretty good relationship with. So it's a tragic case because a kid is seriously injured or loses their life. But then you also see someone in the criminal justice system that you wouldn't otherwise see because they didn't responsibly handle the firearm.
Well, then, if you were giving instruction to a gun owner here in Indianapolis, for example, what methods should they utilize to ensure that the weapon is properly secured? Like, some people think they can hide in the closet or underneath the bed, but what steps should they take to make sure their gun doesn't become one that's used by teenagers or outsiders?
Yeah, the biggest thing is not only where you store it, but how you store it. Gun locks are fairly inexpensive. The Marion County Sheriff will give you one for free. In addition, we partnered up with the Marion County Youth Violence Prevention Coalition. They will give you a gun box with a lock so you can store your firearm in a box that's locked so people can't have access to it. Just because people think they put it maybe a little bit, on a high shelf or, oh, no one knows where I store my gun. The reality is kids are curious and they watch you and they're more aware than you think. And so if that gun is not locked down, there's a good chance the child's going to have access to it.
Now, in terms of public safety, and I don't want to get too much into the political process, but it's kind of bothered me when one of the solutions that were posed by a person running for mayor is that we need to hire a public safety director. I mean, I don't get that. How does that affect the public safety? We have prosecutor, we have police chief, we have fire chief. What would be the role of public safety director and what would they do differently?
Yeah, I don't understand how one person is going to solve the problem. And, the reality is IMPD needs to solve more cases. And some of that comes down to resource issues. Some of that comes down to the lack of trust between the community and law enforcement. But that public safety director is not going to move the needle as it relates to that issue. We got to solve more cases. That's just the reality. And so I don't see that as the panacea to the problem. What we need is let's make sure everybody has the tools they need to be successful. Make sure they have the equipment. Make sure the staffing numbers are appropriate. So the number of open cases is at an area that's manageable for everybody. But this idea that if we just bring in a public safety and add more bureaucracy to government, we're somehow going to be safer, is an idea that just doesn't work. We don't need more bureaucracy. We need more solved cases.
The other issue that is a national issue is that we have a proliferation of fraud. It's just whether, everybody's going to experience this now. We've got hit several times. In terms of fraud, there's all sorts of fraud, all kind of gimmicks now. People tap into your emails, they get in your bank account. What should a person do if they become the victim of fraud? Whether it's stealing money out of their account or fraudulent scheme, what mechanism should they pursue in order to be protected or have them better adjudicated by the court system?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. Number one, always report it immediately to your financial institution. And then number two, you have to report it to law enforcement. We dealt with a situation this week where someone was a victim of fraud because they were getting a call saying, hey, you missed jury duty, and because you missed jury duty, you have to pay a fine of $500. They turned over their credit card number, and it was obviously no one's ever going to fine you for not showing up for jury duty, and they're certainly not going to do it over the phone. And so those are the types of things that we see consistently. So please, number one, make sure you report it to your financial institution right away, but also make sure you report it to IMPD and make sure they know, because a lot of these fraud schemes are not isolated incidents. They touch more than one person. And so try to be as proactive as possible, letting people know. And oftentimes it's bigger than just you. There's other people involved. So people can try to be as proactive as possible. And then hopefully, if IMPD follows up quickly, if the financial institution follows up quickly, we can hold the people accountable who are doing these things. But I mean, financial crimes happen far, far too often in our community that probably don't get reported at the rate they should. But people need to be vigilant about that. And if you're a victim, say you're a victim. Don't be embarrassed and say, hey, I got swindled on this, and make sure that the authorities have that information.
The other issue we're seeing a lot of is that particular post-pandemic and during the pandemic, we've seen an uptick in spousal abuse. And what should a person do, a wife, girlfriend, something, if they're a victim of spousal abuse? What steps should they take?
Well, one of the toughest things to break, the toughest cycle to break is the cycle of domestic violence. And I think the biggest thing is, and you talked about the community earlier. I think the other part is this has to be a community-based solution as well. If someone's in a domestic relationship that's abusive, it's really, really difficult to break out of it because it's based on control, it's based on fear. And so helping people break out of that relationship is important. It's really tough for people to do it alone. There's a number of great agencies in our city who do a great job helping domestic violence victims. But we as a community have to be willing to support those individuals. So, number one, I always encourage people to call the police, call 911, because that's the best way to deal with an emergency. But a lot of times people are looking for shelter after the fact. Talk to the Julian Center, talk to the Salvation Army. They have a shelter that's really proactive in terms of helping people find shelter, in particular victims of domestic violence. And then if there's a criminal case that needs to be filed, call us at the prosecutor's office. We do have some funds available to help people relocate. We are in a position to help people with rent if they're in a domestic violence situation, they're trying to move away, if they're trying to, kind of break that financial control. But, when we see people kind of break out of that cycle of domestic violence, it's oftentimes because they have either family support or community support. There's a lot of people, who are struggling. They need both incomes. They feel like they need the other parent to help pick up kids from school and, be a part of their lives. And no one wants to, send someone's dad away because they want their dad to be involved in their kid's life. But at the end of the day, it's so critically important that people break out of those relationships because what we see is the impact that has on kids oftentimes leads to domestic violence in the future, which is something that we all want to avoid.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today and for your words of wisdom. And we appreciate your input, and we continue to hope and continue to do the good job you and your staff are doing. I know that you're fighting a big battle now. You got some staffing issues like a lot of us, and just keep working hard to make sure there's justice in our community. Thank you very much, sir. Thank
you. I appreciate the time. It's great to talk to everybody.
Thank you. Now we a caller, Mrs. Cox. Now, what about these commercials, Mr. Cox? Have you seen the commercial with Jefferson Shreves?
Yeah. First of all, thanks for having the prosecutor on. He explained a lot of the questions I've had over the last few weeks when I've called in to talk about this. The commercials upset me somewhat because I think Jefferson Shreve is making statements and using African Americans to represent what he believes. I don't think they necessarily believe what he believes. They're just making a statement because they've been encouraged to do so and have suffered some trauma in their life, some type of crime. What I'm concerned about going forward is that he may continue to do that, and we may get the wrong message out to the community. I'm hoping that just like you had Prosecutor Mears on, that you can get Mayor Hogsett on to speak a little bit about what he's planning on doing in the future to counteract what Mr. Shreve is talking about, and also perhaps getting Mr. Shreve on so he could address people on your show, because I think it's delivering the message that we all want to hear right here in Marion County in Indianapolis.
Well, one of the questions I like to ask him, if he was on my show, maybe I'll call him this week, is that, you know, I looked at his corporation and he did all the advertising, no diversity. I'm thinking that the city is 40% diverse and you run a company, a multi-million-dollar company, you don't have anyone, any African Americans. I'm saying, you know, how can you be the mayor of a city when you hire people, you don't hire any of us to work for your company? So our city have a substantial amount of minorities who work for the administration and different departments and stuff. If you don't have a history of hiring folks fairly, what makes you think you're going to come into a public corporation and do anything differently? And I was concerned about that.
And you know, Mr. Lee, I absolutely agree with you. That's why one of the commercials, he has a young lady that's talking about that she basically just became a resident of the Indianapolis area, and she met Jefferson Shreve, and she's going to vote for him based on her just moving in, not having any history about how this community was set up and so forth. So yeah, I hope that at some point someone can address that, and maybe Mr. Shreve can address it as well, because I've seen several of his commercials about his business, and I've not necessarily seen anything that reflects the percentage of African Americans that are in Marion County.
Well, that's the problem, you know, and it's almost like you got a lot of money and you could go out and spend a couple $1 million on advertisement and don't really have any solutions to any problem. He said, I got a plan to solve crime. Okay, well, the problem we got is that everybody got guns. Everybody got guns
Yes, absolutely.
now because they made it available to everybody because the Republican-controlled legislators determined that there's no limitation on gun. Basically, unless you go out and have a serious felony record, they allow you to get guns and carry them openly. Now,
yeah, that Second Amendment right to be able to carry firearms, I would like for him and the mayor to both address that. I mean, we already realized, based on what Prosecutor Mears said, that it was determined by the legislature that you could have one without a license and probably without the training. So someone needs to address that. I almost feel like, you know, we're living in the Wild West where, you know, when you walk into a town, everybody had a gun on. But even back then, if you didn't wear a gun, folks didn't really accost you like they do now. All arguments break out, and instead of just kind of resolving it with a verbal altercation, someone wants to pull out a gun and shoot you. And it's unfortunate. I think one of your prime hosts on the show has made the same comment himself that, you know, in California, it's just ridiculous how many people have guns. And he refused to, he took his gun out of his car, is what he said a couple of weeks ago. And he doesn't carry it around because you get into an argument, next thing you know, instead of just talking it out or even having fisticuffs, you pull out a gun and folks get shot.
Well, the irony is that Shreve is a member of NRA who wrote the legislation that I found out today for these draconian gun laws. And now he says he's going to solve a problem that he helped create. So hold on a second, sir. Let me have one or two calls. Hold on. A call, you have a question coming for us today, Mr. Phillips. Hello.
Hello.
Yes,
how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic.
Yes. I was hearing about Jeffrey Shreve, and I was listening to one of his ads. You know, I was listening to one of his ads, and one of his ads was he's a supporter of when they had that rifle association. Okay, people, we have to understand when we see an ad and when people want to be one of the government officials, and they support that ad. That means that means they not for the people. That means they sending y'all the wrong message. The right message is when you see your senator or your governor or your mayor rolling up his sleeves for the community. When you see a governor and a mayor and one of the senators and Democrats rolling up their sleeves, them the ones that we should vote on. If just like I heard a caller said, it was somebody moved here from another city. Sometimes they don't know about that person because they haven't studied on that individual. We know that if we see somebody doing something positive for the city, that's who we're going to vote for. Don't vote for nobody who ain't going to roll up their sleeves and trying to say we're going to bring crime down. We know who's going to bring the crime down. And first thing is, we know people, it sounds like to me, we listen to the wrong message. We got to listen to the right message.
Well, okay.
That's how we're going to make a change.
Well, thank you very much.
Because if we don't, we're going to be back in trouble again.
Well,
And it seems like to me, we listen to nonsense people saying, vote for me. I'm the right candidate. No, if you ain't rolling up your sleeve, you not the right candidate. Because I ain't going to vote for you, I'm telling you.
Okay.
I'm going to vote for the ones who I see is making a positive change. Like our youth. Every year, our youth is having a summer job. We are putting positive things in people's heads. All this negative stuff, it needs to cut out. Sometimes God is not pleased with it. And we know right from wrong. If somebody is helping you, let them help you.
Well, thank you very much. Okay, next caller. Wait a second. Hello, Mr. Pullen.
Hello. Daniel.
Yes, Mr. Pullen, you have a question coming for us today. Go ahead.
Oh, hello, Nate.
Yes, sir. How you doing?
Hello.
Hi there.
Yeah, this is Pierre.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. On that, I haven't heard either one of them, Jefferson Shreve or Mayor Hogsett, talk about what the plan is for homelessness in Indiana and Indianapolis, if they've got a plan. The other thing I would like to know, what is their plan to clean up downtown Indianapolis? You're building this $1 million hotel downtown, and you got all of these people sleeping in doorways and all of that. I haven't heard anybody address that. And the other question I want to know from both of them is Indianapolis, Indiana, a sanctuary city? And I would hope not, because, I'm looking at images from across the country. You've got all of these new arrivals, illegal arrivals, showing up, and they're being housed in the police department up in Chicago, and New York City is doing all of this stuff for these folks who are in my opinion, are breaking the law and coming to this country illegally. And you've got these cities bending over to take care of them, which is the humane and thing to do. But I want to know what their plan is if Indianapolis gets hit with something like that, because at some point somebody's got to start screaming at the Biden administration to do their job. And the president is doing a great job, but on immigration, he gets an F from me. And that's all I wanted to say.
Okay, thank you, sir. Okay, Ms. Thomas? Hello?
Hello?
Oh, yes, sir, you have a question coming for us today.
Talking to me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm Jeff.
Okay, Jeff, what's your question or comment?
Okay. Well, for one thing, I'm supporting Joe Hogshead. I think he's done an outstanding job, and I think he's the right mayor for the right time, because we are all this construction going, jobs are being created, and as far as this crime situation, I didn't know that crime. Well, listen. Crime is not a blue or red thing. Okay, we're in a red state, and if you look at statistic-wise, crime is high in a lot of these red states, and they always want to put the emphasis on these Democratic-ran cities. So, and with Governor Holcomb with this gun law, which basically just threw more fuel into the fire, and no wonder we got an outrageous homicide rate, being the size of the city that we are. But one question I really want to ask you is if either you or your guests have any opinion on the situation in Fishers as far as the in southeastern Hamilton County about the removal of the school superintendent up there.
Well, I can tell you about that because I know who she is, and I've talked to her before. Essentially, she was selected as superintendent when they had a really fair-minded board who went out to try to get the most talented person to run their school district. They wanted to make sure their district has some outstanding results under the African-American superintendent. However, there was a national push all around the nation, including in our city, where these right-wing conservative group who tried to change history, they spent millions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of dollars in local school board races. And so they supported 4 candidates, and these 4 right-wing candidates took over the school board, and when they took over, they want to change the curriculum and things like that. Like we see that happening in states like Florida, whereby right. And that's my point. So they did in Florida, saying that somehow slavery was good. I mean, it's so.
It was a job. Slavery was a jobs program.
Yeah, it's shocking that somebody can say something so ridiculously callous that tells you it's just basically racist to even say that, because everybody knows human bodies.
That's my point.
Yes, go ahead.
And that's my point, Mr. I didn't mean to cut you off, Mr. Lee. And that's my point. You just got some people who just don't realize this is 2023, not 1953. And, this whitewashing of history, and it's all a result of what happened in the summer of 2020, where you had all these young white kids, brown kids, Asian kids, speaking about injustice, systematic racism, joining up with Black Lives Matter. And that scared the bejesus out of a lot of these white conservatives who really want to maintain the status quo. I mean, it's ridiculous that, and plus the demographic change is going to be taking place here in the next 25 to 30 years, where we'll be a minority nation, and it really is just Custer's last stand. You got people who still want to maintain white male patriarchal entitlement, okay? And it goes for women too, because, it just ain't people of color. These guys are hostile to women too. It's all about white males. They still want you to believe that Christopher Columbus discovered America, and that, like Ron DeSantis said, that slavery was a jobs program. Well, my sister got sold, my mother got raped. Hey, but I got a job as a carpenter. I'm a trained carpenter now. So, they now they want to rewrite history about the Holocaust. So these people are fascists. And they're just calling for what it is. You know, they want to maintain white supremacy in this nation. White people are scared to this, especially white men. And, you know, just say you don't like black people. Just say we don't want to talk about, we're going to erase slavery. Just be honest about it. I got more respect for neo-Nazis and the KKK than I do for Republicans. And I don't care who gets mad or upset. Have a nice day.
Okay, Mr. Cox, one thing I need to correct on the air real quickly. The homeless situation in downtown Indianapolis, they have programs for the homeless, and my law firm is right across the street from a large shelter, and they house people. But even though they have opening, a lot of the people that are homeless have mental disease process that they don't go into the shelter. And I'm not sure what the situations are, but they do have a lot of homeless shelters in Indianapolis, and they're trying to address the problem as humane as possible. And like anything else, it takes money and time. And so, but I see a lot of positive results. And I've donated to these organizations because I think it's necessary that we do care for the homeless. The second thing, though, one of our callers, I need to correct some things that I consider misinformation. In terms of border, Americans listen to Fox News and different news stations, and they don't really understand what the issues are. We have people that are immigrants coming to our country, like from Russia, from Cuba, and different parts of the country. They come in and they get documents and they stay in the country. Then other people can't. The problem with the border situation is that the Republicans in Congress have prevented legislations that allows people to lawfully enter the country. And the problem we got is that you got a big backlog, because American is not a country whereby any of us was actually, a family actually came from. We all are immigrants. Some of us came in bondage, our ancestors, but a lot of people were immigrants. You know, that's what America is. The only Native Americans were Native Americans. And so that means that we have to have bipartisan legislation to come up with a solution that allows people to legally enter the country in a humane manner, and that's what has occurred. So the people that blocks the legislation are the Republicans in Congress, and then now they're complaining about the border crisis that they create. Like the same thing with the gun violence. We complain about gun violence in our community, and the cause of gun violence, is, prosecutor explained, is that you give everybody a gun. Now you can't take guns away. You can't solve a lot of the crime process, because when you take the guns away, you run tests on them, then you can solve all sorts of crime, because the weapons sometimes give you identity of the crimes. And so when we lost the ability to do that, based on our legislator passing these draconian bills, that harms the ability to catch criminals. And so I want to make sure we clear it up. Now, one other thing I need to clarify also, I don't believe that the majority of white citizens in our country race, that's just not true. In fact, majority of folks I want across all races, they're not bigots. And so I don't want anybody to think that, because that's just simply not true. If we'd had a majority of whites in our country would have been racist, we never would have gotten rid of slavery. And so you have to think of this more globally. We have a minority of folks that maybe are racist, and a minority of folks who are doing that, but not the majority of folks. And so you shouldn't ever paint that as a broad brush like that, because as a practical matter, I have lots of friends of all races, and I could tell you the majority, probably 90-some% of the whites I run across are not racist. I've ran across some of the hardcore, but the majority aren't. So now finally, the other issue had to do with, let me see, NRA, issue about law enforcement that we received. The law enforcement community, although not perfect, but they need help. So when you see someone that you have access about a crime being committed, make sure that you report it and assess. we had the prosecutor on, and he talked about the fact that, you know, whenever you have this situation occur, make sure you call in to help out. Now, Mr. Cox, back to the other issue. We had a couple of things that went off the rails, and I want to make sure I correct those, because I don't want people to think somehow that comments that have been made are always accurate, because when I see things that are, I think, are inaccurate, I try to make sure we correct that, sir.
Yeah, I think you did an excellent job of just addressing all the issues, particularly, like I said, with Prosecutor Mears and the previous callers that called in. One of the things I think that is going to be of interest is that this hot button issue of crime in Indianapolis is no different than it is anywhere across the country because of proliferation of guns. But one of the things, I think one of your callers called in about talking about a multi-million-dollar hotel being built. Think about that. In a sense, people are still wanting to invest in Indianapolis, irregardless of all the hot button issues about crime and gun violence. At the same time, I think the current mayor is addressing the issue of the homelessness. You mentioned that. The other caller talked about the homeless people being here and the fact that we in the United States have brought people in, and we brought them into Indiana. Camp Atterbury had a great deal of immigrants that came into this country, and they've been dispersed throughout the country somewhere. So there's something to be said positively about the city of Indianapolis. Your show has addressed that, and I hope it addresses it going further with more callers, professional people calling in, like Prosecutor Mears, to talk about the fact and clear up the issues. And you do address those, Mr. Lee, about the gun violence and the proliferation of guns, and that how they got to where they are. But at the same time, the community is surviving. So that young lady that is on the Jefferson Shreve commercial that comes in and says she just moved to Indianapolis, she moved here for a reason, and the gun violence was here before she got here, and it'll probably continue after she gets here. It's nothing new. It's just that when we talk about running for political office, I should say, and then you get people that want to take an issue and say, this is what I'm going to do to clean it up. I don't think any one administration or any one person can eliminate the fact that everyone has a gun, and when you got guns involved, someone's going to get hurt. At the same time, big corporations are putting money into this city. We've got this issue now with the NCAA trying to make sure that we hold on to the Big Ten Celebration Championship game. They wouldn't be doing that if they thought that this gun issue was that much out of hand. So as long as you keep having discussions about the issue and the fact that these commercials that are put out here, it's negative advertising. That's all it is. It's something that we should be aware of and be ready to vote. It's just that simple. Just be ready to get out and vote.
One of the things too, sir, is that I watch when they said that there's a problem like with Democrats, but you look at the state of Texas, right? And they have majorities in every government statewide office are Republican, and they have controlled legislators of both chambers, right? And yet, Texas have more mass shooting than any place in the world. I mean, about every year they have some major. They don't have mass shooting; they have 4 or 5. I mean, look at Uvalde, the school where kids are murdered. They had the military base in Texas. I remember whereby on a military base, guy went lunatic and just shot and started killing people on Fort Hood down in Texas. And I don't know why they named a military base Hood, you know, after some general. But the point I'm making is that these mass killings are populating all over the country, and they're not about Democrats or Republicans. They're about gun ownership versus non-gun ownership. You know, we saw these shootings just populate, and they increase once the weapons ban on assault rifle expired. And then once that occurred, we saw a dramatic increase in these violent shootings. So I want people to understand that shooting and homicide has a direct relation to the availability of getting guns. You know, we used to can resolve issues sometime with fist fights and things like that. Now, if everybody's got a gun, it's escalate into a homicide, and that's what we're seeing occurring. And you can't provide police protection to everyone if everyone got guns. Even the police officers are not safe.
Yeah, that's absolutely, and I'm glad you brought that up too, because another thing that I meant to mention to you, we need to support our local law enforcement. And the city county council just had a meeting here a couple of nights ago, talking about trying to get more budget money into the budget for police officers. We got police officers that are basically underpaid compared to surrounding states and surrounding communities. And so we need to support that. I mean, I think we've always felt that way, but to take on a job now, it's a totally different way to police, and you need to pay these folks for what they do. You know, I think it's admirable that they put on their uniform and walk out there every day and deal with what they got to deal with. And it is definitely much more complicated than it was before, because as we started this conversation in this program, it's all about gun proliferation, and it's out there. Everyone has one. So when a police officer makes a simple stop to maybe correct you about, maybe he's going to give you a break because you didn't have a turn signal on or something like that, and then it gets into a situation where he's walking up to a vehicle and not knowing whether or not, what kind of day you've had, or whether or not you think that you could just about match what he's got. He's got training with a gun, and when he sees it, I mean, I understand it. They want to go home at the end of the day, but they want to be paid current, you know. So I think that's something else we need to look at. When this comes up for this election, we need to get more money out there for our police officers and make sure that they do the right thing.
Well, you know, I'm a big supporter of police officers because I represent a lot of cops involved in accidents and they get hit, along with city workers. My unsung heroes, sir, are city workers. They're out there every day doing potholes, repairs, removing garbage, things like that. And they put their lives at risk more so than police officers. Most people don't realize that. City workers get struck by cars more than anyone else. We have these lunatic drivers out there don't pay attention to garbage men or people doing potholes repair and things like that. And so my unsung heroes, sir, are city workers in general, not just policemen, but these city workers. But the second thing, though, in terms of our safety net, firemen, right? I think that
Absolutely.
I think that they risk their lives every day also. So I like for all the city workers, police officer, firemen, and the city workers all to get livable wages. Of course, we have an issue with budgetary constraints. You know, our state don't necessarily share revenue correctly with the city of Indianapolis based on our population. I think we're about 18 or 19% of the state population, but we don't get a pro rata amount of tax revenue in certain areas a lot of times. So we have some restrictions in terms of the ability to pay for things because we have a fixed ascertainable budget, but I'm all in favor of doing what we can. And I also like to applaud the city and the mayor for having a summer job program for our youth in the city. I think that's kind of unique in the sense that we need to applaud his effort, you know.
Absolutely.
But the other issue that they brought up, I think, is that the homeless situation downtown. Have you seen that? You know, across my law firm, they have this huge facility that houses the homeless. Have you seen that before?
Yeah, Wheeler, Michigan. Yes, I have.
Yeah, and so they do a really good job, and but yet and still, I noticed that sometimes the people, I've seen them walk out the door, and until I put up the fence, they walk around my building and sleep on the ground. I never understood that. Didn't make any sense to me. Then I realized that there are a lot of things that we don't fully understand about that in terms of a lot of people that are homeless. It's mental health issues that has to be addressed. Not just the physical location, but oftentimes these folks have some adverse mental condition that result in their homelessness, and not a lot you could do about everyone, but that's just one of my comments. Now,
well, you know, let me just comment on that real quickly too, because Jefferson Shreve continues to say he's going to put a safety director in place. Prosecutor Mears addressed that, saying no one person can solve that issue. But mental health issues, homelessness, crime, all of that would probably fall under the purview of the safety director, I would assume. I'm not completely understanding everything that goes into that job. But if I were to see a new safety director, I would certainly insist that that is something that he has to address too, not just crime and the things that go on in the city, but the homelessness and, again, the mental health issues. Because certainly, like you said, if a gentleman walks or a lady walks out of a mission, is providing a bed, a meal, and so forth, and walks across the street and lays down on the ground, there's something wrong with that, particularly, considering the climate and the kind of things that could happen to you. Just want to make that comment about
Well, here's something that I need to put out there that most people understand. Government works a little bit differently. We already have a person in our state and local government, in our local government, that addresses, we have the deputy mayor of neighborhood. So they have deputy mayors that perform the same function. And if people study the city government, they'll realize that they already have somebody in place to address these different issues. So that person will be a deputy mayor. We have multiple deputy mayors, and their job function, although not entitled public safety director, but they operate under the same rubric. Also, the safety mechanism, you have our fire department, you have a police department, you have our sheriff department. So those are the three mechanisms that provide our public safety net. Then you have the city workers who make sure that our roads are clean for snow and potholes repaired. That provides safety. So each of the elements of the city operation is covered by a different city official. So what they're saying is that we want to add another layer of something that's already been addressed. And the fact that we have an uptick in shooting, we've explained that that's related to the proliferation of guns being available to anyone in our community. Now, one final thought for today, folks. I appreciate all the callers calling in today, and they provided a wealth of information, and their opinions, of course, are not necessarily the opinions of me or the show, but it's their opinion. They're entitled to opinion. But the one thing that's important as citizens is that each year you have an opportunity as a citizen. This year, we have the opportunity to vote for a mayor of the city of Indianapolis. It's important that you show up and vote. Without the ability for folks in our community to vote, we could lose the mayor's office. The mayor's office got good diversity, and I can tell you from firsthand knowledge, they're working hard to try to address the issues of our city. But no one person can fix every problem in our city. It requires each of you to also participate in government. So if you get a subpoena to appear for jury duty, you need to show up. If you see somebody committing a crime, you need to articulate and report it, and be prepared to go to court to make sure the person is prosecuted. So citizenship involves more than just griping and complaining. Citizenship requires that you do something to help government function. So when you get in that situation, like if I see somebody have a car crash, I stay around and I try to assist the person, but also leave my information. I saw what happened. And that's what being citizens is about. We need to be more supportive of each other. And because we're all in here together, we got to look out for each other and make the place a better place for you to live and me to live and our kids to live. So just don't forget, people. Make sure you get registered to vote. Make sure that you get your friends vote. And let's protect democracy each and every way. And let's help each other. Until then, I'll be off the air next week. I'll have my partner talk about Social Security and benefits, and we'll be back in 2 weeks. So until then, may the Lord bless and keep each and every one of you until we talk again. Take care, everyone, and have a